binding directly to my view model. If you remember, the source of a list view, let me go ahead and show you a list view, is not each of the elements. We have to set this to the observable collection somehow, and then of course each of the items inside of the list view is an element. But we do have to access this through the observable collection, not through this variable, because this variable is just a local variable. As you can see, we need to bind this to something that is coming from the expense statuses. So what I have to do in here is get from the view model.expense statuses the element through which I'm iterating through right now, which means that before the for each loop, I will have to define an integer count equal to 0 and access the count in here. So hopefully this is clear. So we cannot bind directly to the ES because this is a variable that we are creating locally. But basically here we are getting that exact same element from the expense statuses, the element that is inside of a specific count. So the first time the 0, the second one the 1, etc. Of course, that would mean that count is incremented by 1 by the end of the for each loop. So the second one is the 2. So again, basically here we're getting the exact same element as ES, but ES is a local variable. We have to set the source to the one that is coming from the observable collection. So we have set the source of this binding. Now we have to set the path. So I am going to set the path. By the way, in SAML, this would be already inside of a property. In the case of the switch cell, my own property. But that is something that we do slightly later here on C#. So basically my path is now going to be in a string the name of my property, which is going to be status. So I want to bind the status property. In this case, I'm creating the binding for the on property again. So I have to bind the status. Finally, I could just like on SAML set the mode. And the mode, notice we can access the binding mode enumerable in here and set this to two-way. And we have now created the binding. Now in this particular case, we don't really need anything else, but from the binding, you could set things like the converter. You could set some way of converting, maybe this is a 1 or a 0 and you want to convert it to true or false. You could do it through a converter. You would simply assign this to a new converter. So if you have ever used the I-value converter interface, you know what I mean. Hopefully you have. So that is how you would set it, but currently my binding is ready. So finally, for the cell, I could set the binding for a specific property. So the first thing that I have to assign or to pass to this method is precisely which property I want to bind. And the switch cell is going to have the on property, which is the one that I've been telling you is for the one that I'm creating this binding. So the on property. And simply set the binding to the binding variable that I have, just like this. Now I have created a cell that has that binding to a particular element inside of my expense statuses observable collection from my view model, and it's already setting a two-way mode. Now all I have to do is add this cell to my table view, which means that in my table view I am going to need a name. So let me set a name for my table view. This is going to be expense table view, which means that first, by the way, I will have to create a section and to the section add the cell, and that section can be added to the table view. But let me go ahead and quickly create a new table section that is going to have a title of statuses. To this section I can add this cell, and to the table view, the expenses table view that I have just named, access its root, and to the root add this section. And that's it. Now let me go ahead and add a breakpoint over here when we are inserting, So we take a look at the status of our view model in that particular moment. So for that, actually, let me set the breakpoint down here. To be able to take a look at the status of our view model, let me go ahead and create a new variable of VM that is going to be equal to this, just like this, so I can inspect it in runtime. So let's go ahead and run this. And now if I navigate over to the new expense page down here, I'm actually creating a new statuses section inside of the for each loop, which should not have happened. This section should have been created from outside of the for each, but you can see how this is immediately binding to what we created over here. We created random 2, random 3, true, true, false, and that is exactly what we have over here, random 2, random 3, true, true, false. Now let me go ahead and invert the values in here through the interface, of course. By the way, you can see how the switch cell is going to look in Android. Hit on save, and let's inspect the VM. So the VM is now going to have expense statuses of sort of a collection. And let's inspect the first one. It is already false, where the first time when we created it, it was true. The second one, false, and the third one, true. So you can see how it is binding the elements as it would if we had created this with SAML, except the binding is done through C#. So hopefully this is not that hard to understand. After all, we're creating a binding in the same way that you would create it through SAML. We are creating first, of course, the binding, then the source, the path, the mode, and finally setting it to a specific property. So now that we have created this application and even took a look at this weird scenario, in the next section, we're going to focus on improving how our application looks. We're going to start to modify the way this application looks so we can customize how certain elements are going to be displayed. Not just use what the native default functionality or looks are, we're going to be able to customize it just a little bit. So in the next section, we're going to focus on working with custom renderers for both iOS and Android.